Hi, and welcome to the Heart of Success podcast. I'm your host and author, Keith Washo. Super excited to introduce you a living legend in Silicon Valley. It's Mark Adams. I was blessed to be able to get to know him when he was VP of Sales and Marketing at Creative Labs. And then he went on to become president of Lexar. He became president of Micron Technology, CEO of Lumiled, CEO of Penguin Solutions, Mr. President, CEO himself, and now very active in serving as a board member on numerous great companies like Seagate Technologies, Cadence Design Systems. Just an awesome person. Very honored to have him on the show to talk to you about some of the input he put in this book when we sat down 10 years ago for the interview. So Mark, thank you so much for taking time to be with us to share a little bit more color on your inputs from the book. How are you?
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Keith. Great. Appreciate you having me on.
So we'll get right into it. We're going to share 3 things from the book that you talked about so you can expound upon that for everybody. The first one was talking about how do you be successful just as a person, because the book's all about growing your professional and personal life in the right way. And you're clearly someone who's done that from everything you achieve, but also just as a great father and a husband and family person. So would love to get into that. And your first thing was about the importance of listening. You wrote, you have to be a good listener. It's part of being good with people and showing respect. To be successful, you need to be competent and a problem solver. And then good listening helps you do that. So I'll toss that your way if you have the opportunity to add some color to that.
Well, I think it applies both professionally and also personally, but for slightly different reasons. In the professional environment, listening kind of gives you context to how people are thinking about things and really allows you to digest, all different viewpoints. And I think, in being a good executive or a good leader in business, I think first you have to kind of start with a broad-based understanding of what the environment's about. Like you can't rush to conclusions. You have to digest things. Now you never work with perfect information. That's never going to happen in business, which also makes listening so much more important, because whatever you digest and whatever you kind of incorporate into your thinking will be the basis for good decision making. So I think in a professional setting, it's so important to get input and listen to others before making your own decisions, because that's, in a lot of cases, that's the best data you're going to get. On a personal front, listening to people is kind of interesting because that's a great way of getting to know them, but also more importantly, what's on their mind and what's going on in their life. And, I've always found that people tend to like talking about themselves, not in an ego way, but more, what's going on in their world and sharing and getting to know them. And it's a kind of a cool form of connectivity and intimacy to getting to know people at a different level. So yeah, I think listening's super important. I remember a chairman of a company I was running once, said that you had 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Use them in that proportion. And so I've always thought about that in terms of connecting with others.
That's actually in the book, 2 ears and 1 mouth. You basically have to listen 2x more than you speak, right? For the 1-to-1 ratio. So thank you for that. Well, just as a follow-up question, one of the things I noticed when I was working you at Creative Labs that I thought you did a great job related to listening is when we would have some of our bigger meetings that you would run, you would always ask insightful questions. Like you would just be very direct with people. And I always appreciated that because maybe it's the East Coast side of me, but you were very direct and you asked insightful questions. You always dug for kind of the real issues rather than just accepting. A lot of times in meetings, people just accept the first answer, but you'd be like, wait. You would dig, which would be a little uncomfortable sometimes, but you would do that. And then you would use probing questions to understand situations. And then, as you mentioned, you listen carefully before making decisions. So based on that observation I had and that input, what else comes to mind for you that you like to share with people?
Yeah, I think like digging deeper reflects an interest and really like a intentional way of getting to know either what you're after in terms of information or just getting to know people. In the business setting, I think that it's always peeling back the onion, especially around bad news. People, I've always, maybe it's through sports and athletics, nothing always goes perfect. And you have to own up to when things don't go perfect. And when you make mistakes, because you will make them. And I've made, thousands of mistakes in my career. It's the ability to accept that. And then, okay, hey, what are we going to do? And in order to figure out what's the next step or how we're going to react, you really have to digest all of it. You got to process what's the situation about in terms of what caused the mistake. What are you trying to fix? What does success look like? And a lot of times people have a tough time admitting their mistakes in life, both in personally, but in business as well. And if things don't go well, and there's an expression, perfuming the pig. It's like they kind of dance around the truth. And I never like that because time's precious for all of us, and I think that, getting to the facts, I don't take it out personally. Tackle the
Right.
issue, sure, but don't take it out personally. But if people are kind of not able to accept, imperfection, or not able to accept their faults, that's always hard because you don't know if you're ever getting the truth from somebody. And so, yeah, I try to teach that as a, hey, look, don't worry about, if we mess up, that's okay. Messing up and owning it's great, and fixing it's even better. But I find, the people who can't accept their faults and don't are not able to communicate when they, had a misstep or didn't achieve what they wanted. That's a kind of a challenge for a company's culture, because then you're never able
Mm.
to deal with reality.
Right, right. I appreciate that. So it sounds like the importance of transparency, authenticity, just being open. Like don't sugarcoat anything. As you mentioned, perfuming the pig. Just a lot of times I've seen you just write these emails. Here's all the good news, but to your point, share the bad news. Probably even more quickly. Keep it under the rug. Right.
Correct. And I see that all the time, even on board in the boardroom, on the three public boards I'm on. It's at times people don't want to give the bad news,
Mm.
and
Right.
like, look, the ironic part about that, if you're in a boardroom, better because that's what you experienced. It was never perfect for us. And all you can ask for is transparency, as you said, and also the
Hmm.
ability to diagnose what needs to be done going forward. But you can't get to the second step unless you're transparent and you're open.
Right. Thank you, Mark. That's really good. I was just curious as the final question on this part of it, just feeding off what you're saying. They talk about, especially in Silicon Valley, that innovation often requires failure. So you sometimes you have to quote unquote reward failure. Now, how do you do that? Have you ever had to like create being you were CEO and president of companies and creating culture? How do you do that? You created an environment where the culture is it's okay to fail, just be honest about it, or do you ever quote unquote reward failure? Like how would you describe that question?
Well, it's different parts of the organization, probably that applies, in different ways. Meaning, when you think about things like R&D, It's
Yeah,
almost like
right.
it's almost like venture capital. Venture capital, if they go 2 or 3 for 10, they're the best
Hmm.
in class because the 3 are big winners, and on the other
Yeah,
7, you lose your principal, and what you put in. I think that's true, like in the R&D and product development at some level, but I don't think the ratios are the same on the front end of the business commercially. So we would encourage taking risks and taking chances.
yeah,
I'll be honest with you, I don't think I've ever rewarded failure, but I mean, accepted and worked with somebody on it and comforted people when they failed, sure.
right,
Because I think that's what you want to do is the world doesn't end if we make a mistake. And,
right,
and really just
right.
making sure people are comfortable in their own skin, that it won't always go perfectly. Because again, part of it for me is that's just not reality. And the other part of it to me is, how do I know what to trust going forward if they can't be honest?
That's right. That's right. So that's funny. They mentioned like in the terms of rewarding failure. So that's a very awkward. Like 3M. That supposedly the guy was trying to make some super glue. He spilled it, didn't work in the lab, and then Post-it notes became famous from that
That's great.
failure. So I guess
Yeah,
to
sure.
your point, just rewarding the transparency, being honest about it, being upfront, and then how do we make lemonade from the lemons, so to speak? Maybe there's some good
Correct.
come from it.
Yeah, that's right.
All
That's
right,
right.
thank you. So let's shift gears here. Go to the second part of the podcast. In the book, we talked about successful people, and on page 274, you mentioned something that was very fascinating to me about successful people, and this is related to the sports analogy. And by the way, for people out there, Mark Adams played quarterback for Boston College, and he was alongside Doug Flutie. Amazing! What a great run and ride that would have been. Well, maybe you can share something on that. But you mentioned you need to have the drive and you want to compete. Just like sports, you need that ability to compete, take on challenges, and want to win. Then you need the discipline necessary to do the hard work and do the right things, perform well, that deliver results. So let me throw that your way and love to hear more about your perspective on that.
Yeah, I've always felt that way. And by the way, I would expand it beyond sports. I had 2 daughters who were in theater in high school and growing up, and I always felt that watching them perform with their friends and running and producing a play in 3 to 4 weeks is just the most amazing thing, because they all have to come together and do it. And
Right.
so whether it's sports or whether it's music or theater, I know you're a
Right.
musician and you're really in a
Sure.
band, you have to have everyone on the same page. Even, I've talked to a bunch of other CEOs. people who are in the military or the Navy or any form of government work like that, where people are helping as part of the whole. Because at the end of the day, it's about having a goal. And most teams have a goal, whether it's putting on a play or whether it's defending your country. Obviously,
Right.
different magnitudes, but the idea of working together and
Mm.
again goes back to what we were talking about earlier. As a team, not everything goes perfectly. How do you adjust? I think about not to get too political, but when
Yeah.
the U.S. was able to successfully capture Osama bin Laden, there was a helicopter that went down, and
Mm.
I happen to know the person who was running the Navy SEALs at the time, and he told us about that. And they had three or four. They planned along the way for different points of failure, and not freezing in the moment and competing and trying to stay focused on the objective. I can't think of any better foundation for how you are supposed to be thinking about your work environment. How do you
Mm.
kind of achieve a goal, and how do you stay true to it, and how do you react to setbacks? Those are all things that athletics, sure, but there's other forms of life that give you the same experience. But I think to me it all goes back to something that's actually important to the day you die is
Mm.
purpose. What is your
Mm.
purpose? And I can't stress that enough, is that when people have intention and purpose, it keeps them aligned and focused on the goal of what they're trying to achieve. And it doesn't have to be for monetary purposes or anything like that. It could be a lot of different things, you know, but just staying true to that is really important.
Thank you. That's phenomenal, especially relating it to both theater, music slash the military, not just outside of sports. And I can agree, theater, the fact that your daughters were able to somehow all agree within just a couple weeks to do it this way, and there's a million options of creatively how to go, is a huge lesson in business on how do you get people to come together to accomplish a goal when there's varying opinions, right? And then, yeah, the military side, that's unbelievable, planning for failure and having backup plans and just sticking to the course. When you mentioned how you relate it to sports, just going back to that, the way I look at it as an athlete myself is that in sports, sometimes you just got to do the thing you don't want to do. You just don't feel like it, right? That discipline. So maybe can you expound upon that in terms of boss playing
Yeah, I
football and
mean,
how that's
it's
helped
funny.
you?
It's funny. Nick Saban, who's probably the best college football coach ever, might be one of the best football coaches ever. He
Mm.
talked about discipline, and he said discipline's very simple. Discipline's about doing the things you don't want to do, and then stop doing the things you really want to do. And because at the end of the day, what separates the 1% from 99%, is the willingness to sacrifice for the good of the others and the team. And
Mm.
that
Mm.
takes a pretty special characteristic. You really have to enjoy that, because there's a lot of sports that's not necessarily true as much.
Mm.
Tennis,
Yeah,
golf, and others, and they're great sports. I
sure.
love golf and love tennis, but from a team environment, it's basically you as an individual, which brings up other rewards, because you're accountable to yourself and what have you. But a lot of people wake up in the morning and they find 10 reasons not to go do something, and
Yeah,
it's making the conscious choice. We all have a choice. Now we can all be victims and blame it on it's raining
sure.
outside or whatever, but at the end of the day, having the discipline to choose intention and goal and purpose over convenience and laziness, that's what separates, great ones from good.
Right, you sound like Tom Brady when he was giving one of his speeches on how he had to just everyone's at the pool, all my friends are at the country club, and I'm in pads and 90 degrees, busting my butt at 6 a.m. and doing 3-a-days, right? And you also bring up a thought about, hey, but it's raining outside, making excuses. And I know you love sales, being that's been part of your success. Is some salespeople get up and say, "Hey, it's raining outside. I'm not going to go call on people. It's raining. It's a crap day." Some guy gets up and says, "Hey, it's raining outside. That means all the rest of the sales guys are sitting home not doing anything. I'm going to go out and get it done."
Yeah, I think,
So,
Keith, I mean, I think life's pretty funny because over the long haul, people who are able to build this type of persona and work ethic, I think they get rewarded. I think,
mm,
life's pretty funny. We think we have control over things and we really don't.
right.
And I think it starts spiritually, but it's also true in a lot of different things. And, how you meet people in life and work. I go back and I think about, the funny results and the things that work for me weren't always in my, kind of control, but they were a byproduct of my work ethic and my commitment to success.
Right. Thank you. It's that whole quote, the harder you work, the luckier you get, or the harder you work, the better the results can be at the end of the day that are outside your control just from putting in the elbow grease. So thank you. And that brings us to the third point of the podcast, which is really right in this theme that I just fell into, which is I asked you on part of the heart of success, growing your professional and personal life in the right way. And the business thing is this thing around work ethic. And you wrote, focus on your work ethic, do good work, give good performance. Performance matters. Execution matters. You must deliver great results. So be results oriented and have the discipline to do what is needed to get done, get the job done well. So maybe just one more final addition, any color or thoughts on that perspective?
Yeah, I think if you have a goal in life, there's ultimately some set of measurement that says, hey, I'm on my way to a goal, I've achieved my goal, or I have not achieved my goal. And
Mhm.
accountability to metrics and measurements and results, most people, again, they get sensitive or they don't feel comfortable owning it because it maybe reflects the fact that they weren't good or what have you. And if you let
Mhm.
that define who you are, you'll never really get off the ground. Michael Jordan talks about missing 9,000 shots. And if you think about a baseball player, if someone is successful 3 out of 10 times, they're going to go to the Hall of Fame. And so,
Wow.
you know,
Yeah.
like like if you think in the context of no one's saying everyone has to be perfect, but
Right.
if a goal is your intention and it's meaningful and it's you're putting yourself out there to try to achieve a goal, then the measurement's not as much of like a reflection of success or failure of a person. It might be, hey, we're not getting the results we want. What should we adjust? But you never get to
Mhm.
that point if you can't own your results. And so to me,
Right.
having measurement around what's important to you, and again, this I think it also reflects in life, like whatever you want to do in life, whatever your purpose is, how do you define what that looks like, and how do you define when it's not going well, what you're going to do to change that? And again, a lot of people take it personally and they don't like to admit failure, and I just think that's such a headwind for eventually getting to
Mhm.
where you want to go.
Right. Just brings up the theme of humility, just to be like, all right, what I'm doing ain't working. I can be humble about it. I can be honest about it. If you like you mentioned it, that whole famous quote of insanity is just doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And lastly, is what gets measured gets done. So to your point of having that goal and tracking along. So thank you for that. The last part of the podcast to keep this punchy, it was or opportunity to share a quote that's meant something to you in your career. One of the things we did 10 years ago when we sat down on this anniversary of this book today is you mentioned how good things happen to good people, and clearly it ties into what you just said. But anything else you want to add? A different quote or anything or any other color?
Yeah, I love that type of stuff, and it kind of have things evolve or you play out or you learn new ones. I mean, one that I talk about with my kids a fair amount is
Mm,
a quote is grateful for everything, entitled to nothing.
mm, mm, mm.
We are all so lucky when in the context of our lives, but we're really not entitled to anything at all. You're
Mhm,
you're kind
mhm,
of
mhm.
responsible for yourself. And I find a lot of times that people do play the victim card of, oh, this isn't working, or this happened to me, or this happened to me. And
Mm,
and that all might be true. I don't mean to minimize it, but it's not helpful.
sure.
And it's not helpful in making someone, kind of go after what's important for them. It's also just that's a headwind to realizing what's important to you. And so I don't have the key or the knowledge to know what is important for you or the next person, but you do. And whatever that is,
Mhm,
yeah, there's reasons why you can't do it, but you're saying it's important to you, and you're not entitled to any success until you earn it. And so
mm.
grateful for everything we have in our lives, but it doesn't mean that we're given everything. And I think at the end of the day, you have to earn your keep along the way. And by the way,
Uh,
that builds character, that builds integrity, that builds legacy, all the things that I think are important in life.
that's an incredible quote. I never heard it said that way before. Grateful for everything, entitled for nothing. To your point, just be grateful for every little blessing you have, but put in the work so you can go and achieve your own and make your own. Don't expect handouts, basically, which is
Correct.
incredible for building your kids and anyone in life. So thank you for that. And actually, it never brings back to a story. 26 years ago, approximately, we were at Creative Labs together, and I remember it's funny what you remember, but I think you were walking in the parking lot and I saw you. And I think this was after we had one of our Creative Labs banquets. And I think I got some kind of award for something. And you were like, Keith, I just one of the things I like is that you don't expect anything. You just put in the work. You're being hardworking, and you don't. And you mentioned entitlement. Actually, you brought that up. It's amazing how, I don't know if you remember that conversation, but you actually said something to me like that. And here we are, 26 years later, just talking about it. Do you have any favorite memories if you just on that note, really quick to end with people that you want to share about your run at Creative Labs and what you learned from that's helped you go on to do such great things, to become president and CEO of so many companies?
I think actually early part of my career, I ended up starting with creative, and I was in Miami, and they didn't even have an org. I was the first person they hired at the company for Latin America, and I didn't speak Spanish and I didn't speak Portuguese, which are the two languages. Brazil is Portuguese, and everything else is primarily Spanish. And it's limiting your belief of what can happen is such a negative in terms of momentum. And I just went down to Miami. I got off a plane. Even Miami is very, diverse in terms of the environment. And I just was naive enough just to kind of, again, work to apply some of these principles in life. And, it just showed me that really anything can happen. Don't pretend to know what the results will be ahead of the game. You got to go perform. You got to go compete. You have to listen to other people and what have you. But if you stick to what's true, yeah, there's anything can happen. It's just, and I think, that quote you mentioned about good people,
Yeah.
just living a good life and being aware and being humble, and
Mm-hmm.
all those factors come in. But I remember early on in creative, like they did no revenue in Latin America, and 3 years later, it was like 150, $200 million business.
That's awesome. What a great story and great run. And it was such an honor and pleasure to work with you, Mark, and for you at Creative. So thank you. And thank you for all you've done for everybody in so many companies in so many ways, and for being part of this book and taking time to share more information on your perspective. Just to conclude here, if people want to learn more about you or some of the new things you're doing, what would you like to share with people?
Primarily today, there's three things I'm doing. I'm serving on three public boards, as you noted earlier. I'm also helping small private CEOs get up and run, and people who've kind of reached out to me, and I've got three current ones that I'm working on where, CEOs, first-time CEOs just don't have that experience, and kind of sharing with them some of the things we talked about today, and helping them get off the ground. And then, of course, you mentioned athletics and sports. I don't know that we've ever talked about this, but a couple of years ago, I was in Italy on vacation, and I got a call at 3 a.m. in the morning, Italy time, and it was the local high school athletic director. Their coach had quit with 2 weeks before the season, and I ended up taking on the head football coach job at Los Altos High School, which is a combination of Los Altos and Mountain View High School kids. And yeah, I've really been a fun passion to be, kind of a leader figure for some of these kids, because a lot of what I talk about today is, came from my experience in growing up in athletics without my father at home. And football was such an important place for me in many ways. And so it's kind of come full circle that I'm able to give that back to some of these kids, and it's been a blast doing it. So
Wow. Thank you for your service, sir. So just so I understand correctly for everybody, are you still the head coach? You still doing it?
I am. Yeah, we're going into our third season. Practice just started on Monday.
Wow. Congratulations. That's phenomenal. Do you want to just share how the team's performed the last 3 years and any highlights?
Well, it has not been much of a program. One of the reasons I think the old coach left is it just hasn't really been very easy to get the kids to commit. And that's really, we're going back to a lot of the fundamentals that you and I have been talking about for the last, half hour or so. And I think one metric we have is, are we attracting more people to play football? And we went from 29 to 35, and this year we have 43 kids on the varsity team. And JV keeps on adding people as well. Last year we finished tied for second in our league, which was a good step. And so, we're working on it, and, we're investing more, and we're trying to teach the same principles you and I have just shared today. So
Right.
we'll see. I'll keep you posted.
All right. Do you still throw on the pads and get out there and throw the ball?
No, those days are gone.
All right. Well, hey, maybe you could bring Doug Flutie back and have him hang out with your players. Huh? That'd be amazing.
That'd be great.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mark. What a joy and honor it is to have you part of the book, for you to take time out of your busy schedule to do this. And good luck to your high school team. I just can only imagine you'll be raising a trophy sooner or later at there as well. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you.
Thanks, Keith. Good to talk to you.
All right. Thank you. Look up Mark Adams on LinkedIn. You can see everything he's doing. And thanks for paying attention to the show. If you have any questions or comments, let us know in the feedback. Thank you. Have a great one. Cheers.